Hello students, I am Dr. L.K. Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS IIT Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In this lecture, we will discuss as well as begin a new week in which we will discuss about ethnicity, about community, about religion and how all of them are intermingled in the global history as well as how the concepts and frameworks that have been developed in the West, that have been developed in the East, can be brought together in order to understand the complex intersections of each one of these concepts and the life world that people are living in. Now, let us start with something very commonly used but very difficult to define. It is called ethnicity. Now, ethnicity, as we had discussed in one of the classes before, comes from the Greek word ethnos, which means tribe, people, or nation. Now, if you remember, when we had discussed about nationalism and nation, I had said that a nation can also be understood as part of an ethnic identity. So, if a nation can be understood as part of an ethnic identity and a nation is there or always there since time immemorial, so does that mean that ethnicity is also part of this broader time immemorial aspect of phenomena? Or if we consider nation and people to be recent and a modernist understanding of people who are living together, then does that mean that ethnicity itself is a more modern concept? Anthony Smith, in his 1996 work, would argue that ethnicity is a more modern concept. It is not that it was always there. People have created ethnicity for their own reasons. But when people are creating ethnicity as part of their own understanding, own politics, is it all encompassing? Does it belong to everybody, or does everybody belong to it, or there are differences of groupings and these groupings are not together? So, ethnicity can be about inclusivity, ethnicity could be about racial segregation, ethnicity could be about cultural segregations. So, in today's lecture, the central question that we are going to raise is what makes a group ethnic? Does belonging to one particular race makes you ethnic? Does belong to a particular tribe makes you ethnic? Does belonging to a particular nation makes you ethnic? If nation is a cultural construct, but if it is a construct of cultural plus political, that means both cultural and political are constructs rather than natural. So, ethnicity, as we will discuss today, is about relationality. It is not about living in isolation, it is not about an island, it is about a grand the constellation in which even if you are creating a constellation, it is about all the various groups, all the various individuals that are going to be part of it, even if you are different stars, but the moment we draw it, it becomes either Saptarshi Mandal or something else. So, let us start, and we will start with certain theoretical definitions. So, over the period of time, a number of scholars have defined it differently. To just briefly go with it, Erikson identifies ethnicity as us versus them in relational distinction. Hutchinson and Smith, they argue that ethnicity has 6 features: name, myth, memory, culture, homeland and solidarity. Shermore Horn speaks about shared ancestry and symbolic cultural focus. Paul Brass speaks about ethnicity defined by language, religion, race, and diet. Berreman speaks about ethnicity as a level of social stratification, and Narol speaks about self-perpetuating communicative membership. So you have 6 different definitions coming here. Now, if you go by the first one, us versus them, this is what is meant by it. We identify ourselves in terms of belonging to a particular tribe because we are not them. So I am and we and others, these are the defining characteristics. I and we, it becomes part of one group or in group. Others are outside the boundaries of this we group, and these boundaries are created through the naming like Bharat, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We are all Indians, they are all Bangladeshis, they are all Nepalese, they are all the Pakistanis. So this is also a way of naming something. At the same time, when we name it as I belong to an ethnic group which speaks a language called Odia. I belong to an ethnic group which speaks a language called Tamil. I belong to an ethnic group which speaks the language called Kashmiri or Haryanvi or something else. So name itself becomes very significant, and with these names attached are the mythologies. My mythology is different than yours. Why? Because I look at my past, I look at my present, I look at my future from a specific perspective that is localized to my own history, to my own understanding of that history and the people who inhabited that history, which is linked to something called culture and memory. So memory and culture, we can never separate them, as well as we can never separate memory, culture from myth, because a lot of ingredients that form our memory, that form our culture, are part of our myths. Think about the great epics or great Hindu epics from Indian subcontinent, Ramayana and Mahabharata. How many people around you, both men and women, got their names from characters in these two epic stories? How many times have you heard about the different kind of stories that are there in these two great epics? Now, can we call them as only Hindu epics? Can we call them as only Hindu mythologies, or can we call them as part of our memory, culture and homeland? When we associate Mahabharata and Ramayana with homeland, that means it is a memory and it is a cultural memory of our homeland, irrespective of whether you are Hindu, you are Muslim, you are Sikh, you are Buddhist, you are Jain, you are animist, you are an atheist. It does not matter, because it is telling us about our shared ancestry, and it has a very specific symbolic cultural focus regarding politics, regarding the status of women in society, regarding what is good, what is bad, regarding our duties, regarding godliness, regarding being tameen, regarding how do we treat our elders, regarding how do we treat our siblings, regarding what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, regarding the role of a king, regarding the role of a wife, regarding the role of children, regarding the role of sadhus and sannyasis, regarding the role of men with great valor, regarding the role of women with great courage, regarding the relationship between husband and wife, regarding the relationship between humans and non-human others. They could be animals, they could be plants, they could be anybody. they could also be rivers, they could also be lakes. Do we treat the Ganga as a mother, or do we treat Ganga just a water body? If we are treating Ganga as mother or a symbolic the future of mother, then how are you doing it? If we are not even considering a river as a mother, then how are we considering it? How do we consider the individuals who ruled over us, now whom we worship as gods and goddesses? So this all comes as part of symbolic cultural focus of shared ancestry. This is not to say that anybody who is living on this land in this country belong to a specific religion, because religion has nothing to do with. You can be from different and segregated religions, but the memory or the culture of your homeland does not change. India and Pakistan may be two different warring nations now, but both of us share our imagery, share our history, share our myths of Harappa civilization. Even if we call it Harappa, the Saraswati civilization, it doesn't make much of a difference because the region remains the same, our myths remain the same, our culture remains the same. And as a matter of fact, what was there at that time is also making a significant contribution towards our language, religion, race and diet. How colonialism created certain dressing patterns, how colonialism created certain language. The language I'm interacting now was given to us by our colonial powers, our colonial masters. But am I speaking in the master's language, or I have repurposed it and have created an autonomous body through which I am using this language not only to define myself, my identity, my ethnicity, but also to critically look at the language itself and how it has been associated with particular forces of power. Think about all the food that you get in the market now: Mughlai food, Afghani food, Kashmiri food, or South Indian food, or East Indian food, North Indian food, or Northeast Indian food. They all came together through history, and we need to understand how ethnicity, the way we are looking at it, is constitutive of it, and how at the same time it leads to certain level of social stratification, what you can eat and what you cannot eat, when to eat, when not to eat, what time to eat, what time not to eat, who can eat from whom and who cannot eat from certain individuals, whether you can consume cooked food or you cannot consume cooked food, can you consume vegetarian food, can you consume non-vegetarian food, or can you consume both of them, and if you can consume both of them, can you consume non-veg food on Thursdays and the Saturdays, or you can consume them on some other days but not on these specific days, because on these specific days there is something the religious or in terms of other beliefs that you don't want to do it. So that's the reason why social stratification is also very significant. And finally, ethnicity can also be linked with something self-perpetuating and communicative membership, because to be part of an ethnie, you have to have a communication and be part of a certain group. This in group of I and we, the out group of others. So the moment we are doing it, we know our boundaries, we know what are the points of intersection, and we know the points of contacts. Different scholars have now also defined ethnicity and divided into these three schools of thought. One is primordialism, second is instrumentalism, and third is constructivism. So the primordialism in a sense speaks about ethnicity as innate, biologically inherited. Instrumentalism speaks about ethnicity as political resource, and constructivism speaks of ethnicity as socially constructed and fluid. Now let us discuss each one of them separately. When we speak about primordialism, it is about our primordial nature or linkages with our primordial the primordial feelings and understanding. So it could be ethnic ties related to natural, inherited and enduring aspects in the form of kinship, religion and language. Second is that what we also need to understand, primordialism speaks about, as I have been saying, about always forever existing relationships or ties, because they are natural and they are inherited and they are enduring. What does that mean? It means that it is natural that all of us who are living in this specific geographical region are part of a certain ethnic identity. Because, for example, we have kinship ties. For example, we speak the or share the same language. Because we speak the same language, so we are creating an ethnic group. An ethnic group which speaks German, which becomes a Germanic tribe or Germanic ethnic identity. In the Indian context, it is a little difficult because there is no one ethnic group which is absolutely dominant. So we have multiple ethnic groups. So if you remember our discussion of nation and nationalism previously, G. Aloysius had argued that in the Indian context, the way we understood our colonial endeavor, the way we understood our nationalist struggle and post-nationalist democracy, there was or there is a nationalism without a nation. Why? Because this ethnic identity is missing there, and whatever ethnic identity is there or was there, it is highly exclusionary. It is highly exclusionary in the form of not just religion and language, but in the form of caste. Even if we are all Hindus, even if we are all Muslims, even if you are all the Sikhs or Buddhists, we are all divided under the banner of caste. So if we are all divided, we don't want to eat from each other, we don't want to share the same texts, the same locality, then how can we call it an ethnic group? So can we consider ethnic groups as only the people who have this enduring aspects of language, religion and kinships? Then that would mean that India has thousands if not millions of ethnic groups. So India is not India if we put that argument in this framework. But at the same time, critics have argued that when we speak about primordialism and with all the catches, that means we are essentializing its idea and saying that unless and until all these parameters are fulfilled, there cannot be ethnic identities. So the Fadnis and Ganguly, they have reworked primordialism by arguing that we can understand ethnicity as subjectively held shared identity. That means that everything does not need to be the one. We can have differences among ourselves, but what are the overarching frameworks? If we have certain overarching frameworks, then we can also identify it as an ethnic group. So we have language based regional identities in India, and if you note, the first state to be created on the basis of language and language alone in India was not Andhra Pradesh, but it was Odisha. But as it happened before independence, so we consider Andhra Pradesh to be the first linguistically created the identity or regional identity. But does that mean that all Telugus, all Odias share the same idea about ethnicity? The answer is no. But as both of them have argued what kind of shared identity we have. Language can be one shared identity, even if there are other differences. The second is instrumentalism, and Paul Brass happens to be one of the greatest proponents of this idea of ethnicity. His is, as the term itself speaks, he is very instrumental in his idea of ethnicity, because he claims that ethnicity is the political construct, and different sets of people use the ethnicity as a political and economic tool, while the elites manipulate the symbols to or elites create certain symbols to mobilize people, for it could be votes, otherization of people, or many other factors. But ethnicity is constructed by the elites to manipulate the subaltern masses and create a sense of oneness among them, and this sense of oneness is usually against somebody. It is never, it has dual meanings as such. One is to create one group and then again create another group which is against it, and let them fight against each other so that you can divide and rule. But at the same time, the other side or the subaltern masses can also use ethnicity in order to create new boundaries, in order to create new identities, and through these identities they can seek both political and economic benefits. So Paul Brass has worked extensively in Western Uttar Pradesh, and through which he has argued that the identity of a farmer, Kisan, how Jat became an ethnic identity. In the traditional sociological and political literature, Jats are considered to be a caste group. Not even a caste group, they are understood to be a jati. So how did it happen that Jats, whether they are Hindus, Muslims or Sikhs, they identified themselves as an ethnic group? Do they speak a different language? No. Do they share the same small geographic territory? The answer is no, they are quite widespread. As a matter of fact, Jats are there in Western Uttar Pradesh, they are in Haryana, Punjab, Delhi, Pakistan, and probably certain areas of Afghanistan. So if the range is so wide, so can we call them an ethnic group, but as part of different religions? The same goes with Gujars. Gujars are Hindus, Gujars are Muslims. So how does ethnicity gets coalesced here? Is it because of the political tool making and economic tool making started during the colonial period, or the divisions are superficial, the internal cohesion between them is more significant? So that is the reason why when we are looking at the formation of ethnic identities or ethnicity, we also have to look at how it is constructed, which is the next topic of our lecture, which is about construction of boundaries. So Erikson, Taylor and Charles Taylor and Barth, they have all spoken about it. While Charles Taylor speaks about creation of recognition and misrecognition towards belonging, Erikson speaks in terms of identities formed in relation to non-members. Whereas Barth would argue that ethnic boundaries define identity. And this identity, as we will discuss in a little while, are always socially constructed. And this social construction makes us believe that we are in the in-group and others do not belong to us. If you dress up in a different way, if you eat a certain kind of food, that means you are part of us. If you are not, then you are not part of us, which leads to discrimination, which leads to a lot of fights, which leads to a lot of misrecognition of who belongs where, and this belonging is deeply political and deeply socially constructed in the modern world. In the Indian context, most often than not, ethnicity is identified as unity in diversity, unity in terms of religion, language, region and tribal affinities. So, even if for example we have tribal groups in India, not all tribal groups are the same. While the central Indian tribes would rather identify themselves as Adivasis because of the cultural notion of their own belonging, the Himalayan groups would identify themselves in terms of their access, in terms of their location itself. Whereas in the northeast of India, they do not identify themselves as Adivasis at all. Rather, it's again about their belongingness, their language, their culture, their dressing, their food habits, so on and so forth. And many a times, even the different kind of locations within them, within these areas that they are residing. Because as I said, Indian identity is, or India itself is a vast and culturally diverse place. So, identities are mostly overlapping. So, the ethnicity that gets created through these identities is also overlapping. And what we need to understand is that these overlappings are not monolithic in character. Rather, we need to understand them as diverse, we need to understand as something that gets created, that is changing and that gets recreated over and over again. As a political construct, as we discussed before, Paul Brass is looking at it in terms of political mobilization. Same way, the Rajni Kothari also speaks of it in terms of caste getting politicized, not politics in caste. So, caste groups have always existed, but in different forms. But when we look at caste groups in different forms, it's also about how politics is shaping caste. How even in the name of the census reportings, we have witnessed different communities coming together by forming ethnic identities. Different scholars have addressed this issue, and these are very fascinating, because during the colonial period when census happened, many communities which had individual identities, which had claimed themselves to be different and separate ethnic groups, came together to address themselves as, okay, we are Kayasts, we are one ethnic group, we are Brahmins, we are one ethnic group, we are Jats, we are one ethnic group, so on and so forth. Whereas there is, as Ambedkar has said, there is absolutely no similarity between a Kashmiri Brahmin in terms of looks, the language, food, as well as in terms of how they behave or interact in their day-to-day lives with somebody who is from Bengal or who is somebody from Tamil Nadu or Kerala. So, how is it that pan-India level we have one identity called Brahmins, or we have one identity called the Dalits, or we have one identity called the Vaishyas? So, naming and shaming, naming and myth making is part of this process of mobilization. So, that is the reason why all the scholars that we have been discussing in this course, they always speak about social construction of communities, social construction of myths, social construction of identities, so on and so forth. And another interesting aspect is that the state itself is giving identities in terms of formal recognition. How did scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and other backward classes became one significant or specific identities? As a matter of fact, you ask somebody in your own college, in your own school or wherever you are watching about their caste, many a times they say, I am from SC or I am SC. I am SC, it is not that I am from SC. I am ST or I am OBC. And most interestingly than this, people even have started saying that I am general caste. Now, there is nothing called general caste. The Varna system that we have been discussing, Do you find any general here? No. Do you find any SC here, ST here, OBC here? No. There is no Varna called SC, ST, OBC or general. There is no caste called SC, ST, OBC or general. There is no Jati which is called SC, ST, OBC or general. Rather, the state of India, following its colonial predecessor, has created this ethnic identity, this community, this group itself for vote banks and patronage politics. So, this is one of the ways through which scholars have understood it. You may agree to it, you may not agree to it. Probably when you hear that, okay, the state has created something specific, you might feel something awkward, that no, I belong to this, so how can you say that somebody else is constructing it? But that is how it is. And in this course, our job is to reassess the way we have taken for granted and naturalized some of our ethnic identities, as well as how do we in general understand our identity. Ashutosh Varshney is also speaking about ethnicity in terms of conflicts and recognition, because many of his works are about democracy and how conflicts emerge and how conflicts are politicized and different cleavages or social cleavages that are created and constituted through political and social mobilizations. So, if there has to be a civic life, it has to be cross-ethnic, and the group boundaries, the more they get enforced or reinforced, the worse it is for an ethnic group, and particularly the worse it becomes for an idea of India, because the intra-ethnic and inter-ethnic identities and networks create an environment through which the idea of India gets coalesced. Similar is with politics of recognition and multiculturalism, in which we have state-sponsored the requirements in terms of Indian democracy or in terms of certain regional councils, in which ethnic identities are determined at a localized level, and these identities get reinforced through subnational movements. And as Sanjeev Barua argues, the state of India will face legitimacy crisis if the subnational movements of ethnic groups are not identified, codified as actual nationalisms, and this will lead to equity and coexistence. So, in conclusion, we can say that ethnicity is not natural, even though certain scholars have argued about it. Rather, it is a political and social construct. So, these are the references that we have used. Now, you can go through them and see to yourself how you look at your own environment, how do you look at yourself, your own past, and how do you look at anything that is happening around you for better understanding. Thank you.